This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Well, hello and a happy Christmas to you all, and welcome to this week's very special episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hutson. Today we're going to be discussing a sort of trend that seems to be happening in London at the moment. Well, I say trend, it's more like a thing that could become a trend, but is more than a trend than one might think. We're going to be discussing Roald Dahl musicals. Roald Dahl is, of course, arguably to many, one of the greatest British authors ever to have existed. His books, such as The Witches, Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Magic Finger, Danny the Champion of the World, The Great Glass Elevator, etc., etc. I could go on. James and the Giant Peach, of course, are all sort of perennial classics in England and, as I understand, other countries as well, including America. The RSC's Matilda, of course, is an incredibly successful musical and is off to Broadway in March 2013, and I'm sure various other cities around the world, and opening at the Drury Lane this spring, or next spring I should say, is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, with a new score by Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman, with direction by Sam Mendes. So I thought it'd be interesting to look back, look forward, and look at the current Roald Dahl stage musicals, of which there are more than one might think. In this episode, you're going to be hearing discussions I had with Charles Brunton, Leslie Bricusse, Grant Olding, whom you heard from last week, Anthony Drewe, and David Wood. Sit back and enjoy the upcoming conversations. Starting with Leslie Bricusse. I want to talk to you specifically about, well, you wrote the first Roald Dahl musical, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, didn't you, with Anthony Newley?
That's how you wrote the score, and various people wrote the screenplay.
Including Roald Dahl himself?
Well, it started out with Roald Dahl, yes. There was a time schedule problem over the delivery of the script, and he was very displeased, I gather, when another writer was brought in, a man called David Zeltzer, wrote the final screenplay for the film, and I think legend has it that Roald Dahl disapproved of some of the plot points in the rewrite, and so it didn't end happily from their point of view. I'm sitting looking at the 15 volumes of the collected edition of Roald Dahl here in my study. It was an amazing body of work. He only ever wrote, I think, 4 films. By chance, I collaborated with him without ever having met him on 2 of them, because I wrote the song for the James Bond film You Only Live Twice with John Barry, for which Roald Dahl wrote the screenplay. Very few people realize that he did things like that.
And also he created the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, didn't he?
That's right, indeed.
Your project of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory interests me. The thing I want to talk to you mostly about today is your expanded version, because everyone knows the film with Gene Wilder. But tell us more about the junior version, simply called Wonka.
When we did the film, David Wolper produced the movie with Gene Wilder back in 1970. And Newley and I we felt there should be like 10 songs in the film. There are, in fact, only 6. It was a logical thing, I thought, in a musical for each of the 5 children to have a song. But they only gave a song to Veruca Salt, a little girl very good little performer who sang a song called I Want It Now. And Charlie didn't really feature as a musical figure. All 5 of the kids should have had a song each about their particular idiosyncrasy, whatever it might have been. But that didn't happen. So later on, through my publishers in New York, the young man called Tim MacDonald became very friendly with Mrs. Dahl, Widow Dahl, Felicity, her name is, known as Lissy. And he persuaded her that a children's and college version should be done with what I just said, songs for all the kids. And so it's a much more expanded version with about 15 songs in it, which has been in America for the last 6 years, I think.
Did it give you a chance to go back and look at the original songs you'd written and kind of change any of those?
Well, I incorporated those. I made a couple of minor changes in 1 or 2 of the lyrics, but nothing serious. They're basically the way they were. The Oompa Loompa song stayed the same. But of course, the Oompa Loompa song was performed 4 or 5 times, because of all the Oompa Loompas commented on the 5 children, all except Charlie. And they regarded those as songs, but they were just reprises of the very simple little Oompa Loompa song.
Do you think the story is, in this kind of postmodern era, do you think a rather cynical audience would look at it as being a bit darker than it originally was intended to be?
Maybe so. It depends. I'm fascinated to know what's going to happen with the new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory stage show that's coming next summer. I think that will be very interesting indeed. And I'm sure it will, I don't know in what way it will have been contemporized for today's audience, but we shall see. I found out latterly that the reason it was difficult for the Dahl estate to have anything to do with the score that we wrote was that Roald Dahl washed his hands of the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and said he wanted nothing more to do with it, which is why I think we could never make progress on turning it into a stage musical, which is why the new musical is a completely different one. And we'll see what happens. But I think they were honoring his request that nothing should be done involving him and the Willy Wonka film. So that's why it's a completely new project. It was, I think, the diplomacy of Tim MacDonald and his relationship with Mrs. Dahl that enabled us to do the children's version that we did. So that was all very amicable.
So when you and Anthony started the film, was the book written, or were you there from the very beginning guiding the narrative, or did you come on board with one of the new scripts, or tell us what happened there?
No, we were shown a screenplay, and we knew where the songs were to be. We just picked the titles and agreed where they would go with David Wolper, and it all happened very quickly. I mean, we were in and out of the project in like 3 weeks. We just wrote the 6 songs and went on our way, not knowing the amazing things that would happen with the film and how celebrated it would become and how long it would live. The first surprise was Sammy Davis Jr., very unexpectedly, although he had recorded a lot of my songs and Tony's songs through the 60s and 70s, suddenly his recording manager had him record The Candyman, which took forever, but it took about 10 weeks to get to number 1 in America, and it remained number 1 and was the biggest hit single that Sammy ever had, which was really bizarre. Very unexpected that was. But the song I think that's endured most of all from that score is Pure Imagination.
Yes.
But again, it wasn't sung properly in the film in that Gene Wilder did it, but he did 4 bars and then there was a hesitation, so it wasn't sung through as a song the way it should have been. It stuck to the wall and is still around. Talking about songs coming unexpectedly, 20 years after I wrote, Newley and I wrote Pure Imagination, Michael Feinstein, here the keeper of the Great American Songbook, was doing an album which he wanted to call Pure Imagination. And he said, it's not long enough. The song has only got 1 short chorus. So 20 years after I wrote the first chorus, I wrote the second chorus, which now went on to Michael's album and is now incorporated in the versions of the show that we do.
And what do you think it is about Roald Dahl that makes his stories for children and adults so long-lasting, whatever you want to call them, that there's something about them that they just seem to never die in popularity?
I think there are various reasons. I mean, I think he's unique, Roald Dahl. He's eccentric. He creates fabulous over-the-top villains. I think his villains are so villainous that kids love to be scared, and that's why there are dragons in stories. You know, he creates these extraordinary creatures who are terrifying.
Apart from in Charlie, because they had to add Slugworth into the film, didn't they? There's no real... Yes, well, Slugworth is the sort of the agent of evil, really, if there is one in that story. But he does create very unpleasant characters. Charlie, I think Charlie is one of his most straightforward heroes. And also the children could be seen as villains because they're all trying to get the golden ticket as well.
The eccentricities, I mean, the 4 grandparents all sleeping in one big bed. You know, he creates wonderful images. That's why I think illustrators loved his work.
And Quentin Blake, of course, is exactly. Roald Dahl's eyes, in a way.
The perfect illustrator, had he not been already allocated, would have been Ronald Searle, would have been a wonderful illustrator for Roald Dahl, because Ronnie Searle was as eccentric as Dahl in his drawings. So they were a perfect match for one another.
Also, Mel Stewart has recently passed, and they celebrated by re-releasing a big box set of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I bet that was great for you to see.
Yes, I had lunch with Mel Stewart a year ago. That's the last time I saw him. And he spent the later years of his life absolutely dedicated to the ongoing promotion of the show, and he was delighted with all that happened to it because it was the greatest success he ever had.
And tell us about Walter Schaaf's input into the soundtrack for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Well, I didn't have a great deal to do with that because I was back in Europe by the time the film was made, and my perennial musical director is a man called Ian Fraser, who goes right back to the beginning of my life with Muley when we wrote Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, and has stayed that way. Walter Schaaf was allocated by the filmmakers to the thing, but we got nominated for the score, but there was no Oscar around that year. But it was a successful piece of work, and he did a very nice job, Walter Schaaf.
Tell me how you and Anthony wrote music, and how you yourself write. Do you play instruments, Leslie, or do you do you work with the musical?
No, I when I write alone, sort of words of music come together. I either get usually first comes the title. The title is the key to the song because then you know what the song is about. One of the advantages of writing musicals is that instead of picking an idea out of thin air, which is what you have to do for an individual song, all musical songs in musical plays or films have a context. So you know what the song is going to be about when you get there, and you know about who the character is, so you know how that character would approach whatever it is he's going to sing about. So musicals give you that instant advantage. And I've been lucky enough in my life to work with a lot of wonderful film composers, John Barry, John Williams, Henry Mancini, those great people. And Newley and I had a very strange... We're not trained musicians. I mean, I can find my way around a melody, but I'm in awe of the great orchestrators who can take a song and turn it into something quite wonderful. But Newley and I did together what I do alone, which is we would sit together in the room and make the song happen, words and music. Either it would be an idea I would start and Tony would take it and develop. He tended to develop the melodies more, and I tended to develop the lyrics more, but on my own I do both, obviously. We had a wonderfully easy, extraordinary way of writing songs, and we were very quick. If we spent a day working together and didn't have a song at the end of it, we'd be very depressed. But it just happened naturally and easily, so that seldom happened, that we were depressed.
So with Willy Wonka, did you have the book, the novel with you as well, or were you working purely off the film?
Yes, no, he gave us the book. We said where we'd like to put the songs, but of course, as I said, we wanted to put in more songs than they wanted in the film. So we ended up just writing 6 songs, which we did quite quickly. I did see Matilda. We had a great evening at Matilda. I think it's wonderful. The energy coming off that stage is mind-boggling. And again, a superbly over-the-top villain.
And of course, Broadway's getting Bertie Carvel, which would be very, very good.
Yes, that's in the spring, I think.
We're looking forward to seeing what happens with the new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But Leslie, thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts on the original Roald Dahl musical, as it shall henceforth be known, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Nick, and thanks for calling me.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Grant Olding. I want to talk to you about your production of James and the Giant Peach that is playing in...
It is. It opened a couple of weeks ago, yeah.
And we're recording this in sort of end of November. This episode is going out on Christmas Eve. Wonderful Christmas show. We're going to be talking to David Wood as well. Tell me about your musical play of James and the Giant Peach.
Well, I got involved. I had a phone call from the Birmingham Stage Company, who I was aware of because in my kind of first year as a composer, they were doing a production of Jungle Book, and I wrote off, submitted some material for it, and didn't get the job. So I was aware of them from that time ago, that they were people that do employ composers, that do have new scores, whether it be for plays or for musicals. They phoned me and said, we're doing James and Giant Peach, can you come and have a chat to us about it. And I was interested because of Roald Dahl. I mean, that's grew up reading Roald Dahl books. My headmaster at my primary school would take us all into his office and read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Boy, his memoir, to us, and fell in love with his writing and his extraordinary voice and his honesty. How he doesn't patronise his children. It's truly fantastic, colourful writing. And James and the Giant Peach, I didn't actually know too well. I'd seen the film.
The musical film?
I'd seen the musical film. I hadn't read the book, but it was on my radar. I'd been asked to score it a couple of times before, actually, for different production companies, and I hadn't been available. So it was something that I had a kind of knowledge of to some extent, and was intrigued by, because it seemed to me an impossible thing to stage. When you look at it, you go, well, how on earth can you do this on stage? So that's immediately interesting. I went for the meeting, and he said to me,
as with many Roald Dahl projects, you look at it,
yeah,
how can you do this on stage?
And I knew that David's play existed and was, we'd done lots and lots and lots and lots. Then Neil Foster, who runs Birmingham Stage Company, said that Nikolai had asked for me to do the music. And I, at that point, didn't realise that Nikolai Foster was directing. And as soon as he said Nikolai Foster is directing, I was like, oh, I don't need to ask anything else. I'm there. I've worked with Nikolai three times before. I'm working with him next year as well. He's a brilliant collaborative director, incredibly creative and inspiring to actors and creatives. And any thoughts I had about how on earth will we do this suddenly were blown away. So,
but that's not something you have to worry about, is it? It's the fact that they are doing it. You just...
Yeah, but still you want to be involved in something where it's going to be imaginative.
Be credible, yeah.
And where the person who's leading the project is going to have great imagination. And I know with Nikolai, with his creative team, Colin Richmond, James Whiteside, and his fantastic designer and lighting designer, a fantastic choreographer this time, Drewe McConey, who I've never worked with before, but my God, he is totally brilliant.
We have to say this isn't a James and the Giant Peach musical, is it?
No, it really isn't. It's absolutely a play. And it has these songs that exist as part of David's adaptation, which you don't have. When you get the script, when you do it as a licensed production, you don't need to sing them. You can speak them, because a lot of them, majority of the lyrics are actually Dahl's limericks, and that presents quite a challenge when setting them to music, because they really are dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, de-dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, and every song is like that. And you go, well, how on earth do I do this? And we've really embraced David's adaptation, the fact that the insects are putting on this play. I think a lot of times it's not done like that, actually, and then people change the writing at the beginning so that it's not presented by the insects. But we've absolutely embraced it. And so the idea in our production is that the insects have written this music. They're all actor musicians. They all play it all. So I've embraced the limerick nature of it, made it really fun. Changed things where I've absolutely had to, because the drama has called for it, the production has called for it, and we've added one extra song that doesn't exist in David's original production, just because it felt like at that stage of the show we needed something, and this song was the obvious.
Did you write that yourself, or write it with David?
Yeah, no, I wrote that by myself. But it's there are only 5-6 songs in it. It's not. It's very definitely a play, and you could do it without the songs, and it would work. It would work fine.
But songs and Christmas and family, they just seem to...
Well, they do.
Having songs help the children engage more in it, probably.
They do, and those lyrics of Dahl's are brilliant. They're such fun. The wordplay is fantastic. These crazy words that he's made up, and they're cheeky and naughty and fun, and having the opportunity to kind of do that with music as well, and because it's come from insects, not be too worried about this is the style of the thing. So being able to throw in a crazy kind of Irish jig and Argentinian tango and all sorts, whatever kind of 1950s funky Latin thing.
Are you blessed with a band, or do you have...
No, we got actor musicians, which was another thing that I was very, very keen that we don't do with tracks. I've worked with tracks a couple of times in the past.
General rule for life when doing shows, isn't it?
It's horrible. It's really horrible, and sometimes you have to do it. But I was very keen to not do that, and the idea of using actor musicians came up. I'd never done that before. It's completely new to me. didn't know how to approach it. But they're an incredibly talented cast who can all play many, many instruments very, very well, and all great singers, fantastic actors. Nikolai's cast it brilliantly. So it was a case of coming into the rehearsals with, I think I'd written most of the songs. I'd written probably 3 or 4 of the songs, and then finding out who was available to play and what they could play,
and reworking them for the people,
and then just kind of orchestrating it for that purposes. And so I was in rehearsals the whole time.
Again, same question. Were you scoring these things, or were you?
Yeah, no, I scored that absolutely. Yeah, I had thought initially I wasn't going to, and that what I would do was just work with them and just kind of improvise it, and then do a kind of similar thing to One Man, Two Guns. But in the end, there wasn't the time, and the time pressure was extreme because of the shortness of rehearsals and the amount of material. So in the end, it was quicker for me just to orchestrate it normally, present everyone with dots, and then say, okay, now get off the dots. And it was like teach the song, teach the orchestration, stage the number, all in one day. So, they had an awful lot to cope with, but done brilliantly.
Well, you worked with David Wood, and we'll hear now what he has to say about your production of James and the Giant Peach. Making his second appearance on Musical Talk to talk about various Roald Dahl musicals and productions is our good friend David Wood. Hello, David, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
You are arguably the most respected person in the country for adapting Roald Dahl to stage. But as regards musical theatre, there's an interesting shift going on with that small production at the Cambridge we mentioned, and a rather larger production opening at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane in the summer of next year. But we spoke to Grant Olding about your production of James and the Giant Peach. It's playing all over the country, but at the moment it's in Birmingham, but it's going to tour the UK in 2013. Grant talked about the music. Tell us a little bit about how you adapted this story for the stage.
It was a straightforward adaptation in as much as I was writing it for a children's audience. As always with my adaptations, I write in the word music occasionally, by which I mean incidental music, music for tension, whatever it might be. However, there was a slight difference with James and the Giant Peach, because in the book there are several rhymes, which are quite well-known rhymes, which Dahl is very clever at, and they're rhymes which children enjoy, and they're quite funny, and they're also quite anarchic, and they're quite yucky. I knew that they had to be in the adaptation. Some of them lent themselves to a setting as songs, but it seemed to me that I shouldn't legislate or insist that they were done as songs, because an awful lot of people who would do the adaptation in the future, I hoped anyway, whether they be schools or amateur companies, or indeed professional companies, both here and abroad, I knew that quite a lot of them would not necessarily want to do a musical. And I didn't see this as a musical at all. I saw it as a play with music, if you like, a play with optional songs. And so what I did was to write into the script the fact that these rhymes could be spoken or sung, and that any production could have any music, any composer could work on it. Now this has caused some confusion over the years, because a lot of quite well-known composers, indeed including Grant Olding, but Jason Carr is another one, have set these particular rhymes. And indeed I have been asked a couple of times if that could become the authorised version, which is the one that everybody is given to do. And I've always said no, and the Dahl estate have supported this, simply because I did not want it to be thought of as a musical. Now, the irony, of course, is that there is a musical in preparation in America at the moment, which is another big Broadway musical, which will be the next Dahl, following Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Matilda.
The irony is that's the second musical of James and the Giant Peach, because the film is also a musical.
Yes, well, yes, that is true. But that's, it's fair enough. But
do you know anything about this new production that you can much? Because this is the first I've heard of it through you, so this is quite interesting.
Well, no, I can't tell you anything about it, really. I don't even know who's doing it, because I think the writers have changed over the years. It's been going on for years. And every year one hears that it's going to be on Broadway next year, and then every next year it's something like that. But apparently the idea is to open it on Broadway rather than London, which is flying in the face of what Matilda and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory have done. It will happen, and of course it'll be huge. Now that's fair enough, but I think that my version, as long as they don't blow it out of the water completely and veto it and ban it from being done, which is a possibility, I think my version will be easier for companies to do who haven't got all the money and all the facilities that a big Broadway musical has. It's interesting, there was a production of my James the Giant Peach in San Diego Junior Theatre, and which I saw, and they did all the rhymes as rap, and it worked a treat. And of course the kids loved it. I mean, the children in the performance, the young people, that was their music of the street probably, and they related to it, and the words came over very well. You could hear them all, and the rhymes worked extremely well. So no, that is what happened. Now Grant was invited by Nikolai Foster, the director of the current production of James and the Giant Peach, using my adaptation to write the music for it, which he did, and he's written
a new song as well. You said
he's written a new song which is illegal, actually.
He didn't say that.
Well, it is in the sense that it is not permitted to write new songs
by you or the Dahl estate, or
both. I mean, this is the adaptation, and if you set a precedent, you know, anybody could do anything with it. Anybody could say, well, let's write another song for the Centipede or something, you know. So that is not strictly speaking allowed. However, it's still in the show. If I'm absolutely honest, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the song, but I don't think that it helps the show. For various reasons, which I won't go into. I mean, it seems to me irrelevant, but it is at the moment being allowed to stay in the show, and it fits in within the conception, the director's conception of it, and I can see why he wanted something in at that particular moment. But no, it's some people find it a very strange thing, whereby they open up Samuel French script and they see that they can provide their own music for it.
But that's wonderful. I mean, I wouldn't say it's strange. It's more, it makes it feel that the theatre company are giving that production something unique that you won't see, like the rap, for example. You know, you won't see that in the in the Birmingham production, for example.
No.
Well, you might do. I don't know what styles Grant has used, but
no, this is absolutely true. Now, having said that, what sometimes happens is that I get a message through my website. People write in and say, we want to do a production of James and the Giant Peach. And this might be a school, or it might be an amateur society, not an operatic society necessarily. And they say, can you recommend us to any music that we could use, because we don't have a person available who could do it. And what I tend to do, there are 5 or 6 composers who I know about, who have done it, and whose productions I've either seen and thought were really quite good, and all of whom have websites, and all of whom, as far as I know, have copies of their music available. So I sometimes say, well, you know, get in touch with these people, and you never know, they might be able to help you by providing something. But what I'm not doing is recommending one particular one, partly because you know, a lot of them are very good, and they're very settable. I mean, a lot of these rhymes are very nice for composers to set.
And it's good as well, probably even for kids to set it to song.
Absolutely. That's what I really would like to happen. And indeed it has happened, whereby a school production, you know, the children with the music teacher or whatever have put together a score themselves. And I like to feel that by giving them that freedom with this material, which is highly sort of copyrighted material, it does give an extra edge, an extra excitement to the production. And also, of course, they can provide or produce the kind of music that the people involved are going to relate to and enjoy doing, which might be any style of music. It doesn't necessarily have to be musical theatre music. And although...
whatever that means.
Whatever that means. Well, interestingly, the rhymes, yes, they do have a rhythm and a set rhythm, and there is occasionally a limerick feel about them where there's a sort of payoff punchline at the end of a verse. But the number of different settings, totally different in rhythm, in atmosphere, quite apart from the actual dots, the different things that people have done with them are quite fascinating. And I mean, it would be a good. I'm not saying necessarily for a PhD student, but someone could take it as a project and go to all the productions that they've been in the world. So they'd say, "Can we have the music and listen to it?" And it's fascinating.
It'd be nice to do a production with sort of one song from each, the best of.
Yeah. Yes, it might become a bit academic, mightn't it, if one did that.
Anthony Drewe. I wanted to talk to you about Roald Dahl today because I associate you with family shows and writing for children and families, and you're a kind of a big voice in this country for musical theatre and, again, writing for families, Peter Pan and Honk and Just So and Mary Poppins and all these other... Many more coming, I'm sure, Three Little Pigs.
There are some more on the way, yeah.
Before we turned on, you started by saying you weren't that familiar with Roald Dahl because we're of a different generation, dare I say.
Sadly, we are. So no, I was very, I was born in the early '60s, and I was very much Enid Blyton fan, and I first became aware of who Roald Dahl was because he presented Tales of the Unexpected on television. Do you remember that?
No. I know of it, but
I knew of that partly because one of my father's cousins was one of the directors on it, John Gorrie. And Roald Dahl used to be sitting in an armchair beside a fire describing an unexpected story that was about to then be televised. And it was a very popular, sometimes they were half an hour, sometimes they were an hour. And that's how I knew the name Roald Dahl. And it was sort of my younger sister's generation who started buying James and the Giant Peach and some of those stories. So I knew the titles, but I was by then a little bit too old for them.
Because you don't have kids, do you?
I don't.
So that would have been the way, my father introduced me to Roald Dahl. He read all the books to me, then I got all the books on tape and things, and then eventually bought the books and read all of those. So, but to other family members, you found his...
Well, I was like that with Enid Blyton. My mum loved Enid Blyton stories. She loved reading us Enid Blyton stories, and I then started reading The Famous Five, The Secret Seven.
Noddy.
Noddy, yeah, Noddy. And
where's that musical, Anthony?
David Wood's done a Noddy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's done The Adventures of Noddy and The Further Adventures of Noddy. In fact, I took my nephews to it. It was one of their first theatrical experiences, was seeing Noddy.
We're going for him later.
With a goblin in it. I remember the nasty goblin. Yes, so Roald Dahl, I'm older than my sisters by 2 years and 7 years, and I guess it was the 7 year gap. No, 9 years. 2 years and 9 years. The 9 year gap, it was that sister, Jackie, who was probably reading Roald Dahl stories, and I felt I was too old for them at that point. And I've only come to his stories as an adult. And I first really took notice of them around the time that Roald Dahl died, because Lissy Dahl, his widow, went to Cameron with a whole box full of books and dumped them on Cameron's lap and said, Cameron, she obviously knew who he was, my late husband wrote all these.
It would have been an awkward meeting if she didn't.
And she said, what should I do with these? What should I do with them? I don't want to be exploited. I want these books to be turned into, whatever, into stage productions or whatever. She wasn't quite sure herself. And Cameron sent them straight to me and said, Ants, what do you think about these? And he's actually sent me 3. He sent me the BFG, Matilda, and James and the Giant Peach. Well, I was aware at the time that David Wood had done a BFG as a play, that there was a play version of James and the Giant Peach, because my friend James Gillan had been in it. And I liked...
Bock in Wicked.
Yeah, Bock from Wicked and Peter Pan for us. And I liked Matilda. I liked the story of Matilda. Well, around this time, I had written The Card with Tony Hatch. And at Tony Hatch and Jackie Trent's silver wedding, I was sat on a table with David Wood. Now, I'd known the name David Wood ever since I was a child. And I told him that I particularly remembered his...
when was this? So 1990?
Oh, 99... Yeah, somewhere around there. 92, 93, something about that. I remember as probably a 9-year-old seeing The Owl and the Pussycat Went to Sea, which was a David Wood play that had the plum pudding flea in it, and it was done at Chichester. And we went as a family trip one Christmas. So I was talking to David about how much I enjoyed that, and some of the other things I'd seen of his.
I'm sure he told you about them at great lengths as well.
He's a lovely man. If you met him, yeah.
I have, yes.
And so I hit it off with David, and then when Cameron presented me with these books, and Matilda was one of them, I said to George, if we're going to do this as an adaptation, David Wood is the Roald Dahl aficionado, because at that point I knew he'd done Witches and the BFG particularly, but the Twits he's done, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Yeah, he seemed to be both the voice of children's theatre as well as the guardian of the gates of the Roald Dahl estate. So he seemed like the obvious collaborator. So he went to David and said, David, this is what's happened. Cameron has given us this book, and although Cameron is not saying he wants to produce it, he is saying, would it be something we'd be interested in doing? And my thought immediately went to him.
Now I'm going to pause you here. Listeners might be able to guess what's coming up. There is a little show playing in London, it's off to Broadway soon, called Matilda. But there's another version of Matilda flying around, isn't there?
Well, there's tiny bits of another version, because what the Dahl estate wanted, and this was at a time when it was Lissy Dahl, and she was being looked after by Jenny Casarotto at Casarotto Ramsey and Tom Erhardt. And what they said they would like us to do was write a couple of songs and a treatment and 2 or 3 scenes. So one day in about, whenever it was ages ago, 94, 95, we did a little sort of a coffee morning to which our agent Patricia McNaughton and Lissy Dahl and Jenny Casarotto and Tom Erhardt were invited. And George and David Wood and I read the 2 or 3 scenes that David had written, and George and I had written 2 songs. One was called First Day of School, which is what opened the show, and it was all the mums and dads taking their kids to school for the first time, and it included a lollipop lady and the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, you met her. And then we wrote another song for Matilda called When I See a Wardrobe, and Jenna Russell did this actually. She sang it in Warts and All, that review we did down at the Watermill in '96, and it was the Matilda character realising that she had this vivid imagination which her parents didn't, and it was basically saying when they see a wardrobe, they think about skirts, think about blouses, think about shirts. When I see a wardrobe, I think of a magic lion who's living out the back, and it was all those sort of leaps. It was what an adult with no imagination would see in an everyday mundane object, and what she saw and how her imagination took on this flight of fancy. And they liked it, and they said, great, you can do it. Well, within 2 or 3 weeks we got a call to say, we said you could do it. Danny DeVito has just offered $1 million for the film rights, and Warner Brothers want to absorb all of the rights, the grand rights they're called. So they got the film rights but also got the stage rights. So we were disappointed, and we carried on talking to the Dahl estate, and eventually it got to a point when they said 2 years after Matilda the film, the Danny DeVito film, is 2 years after the video is released, you can have the rights to turn it into a stage show. Well, in the meantime, Pam Ferris, who was in the film playing Trunchbull, wanted to do it with Stephen Dove at the RSC. And we heard that because of her link with the film, the success of the film, that they were going to let her and Stephen Dove, I think I've got the right name. Is it Stephen Dove? It's someone Dove, composer.
Tim Minchin.
No, it wasn't Tim Minchin. He probably isn't even born at this point. They wanted to see if they could develop it with the RSC, which sort of seemed like, with hindsight, prescient. But that didn't go anywhere. And David Wood, we've constantly stayed in touch with David Wood, and he said, I'd still love to do Matilda with you boys. And then we heard that Tim Minchin was doing it.
So it's interesting. It's interesting it stayed with the RSC.
Yes, and I wonder whether it always did, or whether maybe it did. Maybe in that whole Pam Ferris thing, the RSC and the Dahl estate had got together and thought this is a really good idea. But it's funny. It's a bit like Honk at the National. There was something about doing Matilda with with kids, but with someone like the RSC or like the National Theatre, that was going to give it a stamp of added kudos they have a longer rehearsal period, and it's like Warhorse being developed for all that period at the National Theatre. You couldn't do that commercially, with just a commercial producer.
It's interesting. A lot of shows, recent big hits, they've all started outside London. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in the National up in Stratford or West Yorkshire Playhouse or Chichester, all these shows that eventually make it into London, they've all started where it's a more relaxed, off.
Well, it makes a lot of. I mean, the trouble is nowadays, it used to be that you did that because then you'd avoid the press coming, and nowadays that's not the case. We were just talking to Sam Mendes 2 days ago about Skyfall, and he said he had just literally finished the film, and he knew he got 2 or 3 weeks before the press junket started, and as soon as the press saw it, they started reviewing the film, and they weren't meant to. They broke the embargo. Same thing happened to us with Poppins. We started it in Bristol to avoid the press. Quentin Letts came down and saw it, reviewed it. The floodgates opened. Yeah, thankfully, he loved it. But that meant Baz Bamigboy wanted to come and see it, and suddenly everybody was coming down to Bristol, which was never the idea. But nowadays, with social networks and Twitter and everything, people are reviewing it. They're out in the interval, so you can't avoid it. You can't pretend it doesn't happen.
They're reviewing the set the minute they walk in.
Yeah, they are. They literally are. And I've read it. I've read with what was it? One of our shows recently. Someone was appraising the set before the show had started. Oh, it was my production of Charlie Brown. Someone was saying, "Well, I like the set. Can't wait for the music to start."
I'll be tweeting during the show, which is what happens now.
Oh, yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, they literally have to tell people to stop using their phones. I just wish they could invent something that stops phones from working inside the theatre. The
Theatre of Stratford East done the opposite, and they're giving, the upper circle is the tweeting gallery.
Really?
Isn't it? They have special tweeting, free Wi-Fi up there and things. But you go up there knowing you're going to be distracted by screens, and that's the only place you're allowed to tweet. That alone
would stop me from ever going to that theatre. Bomb it, pull it down.
We talked to Leslie Bricusse about his musical of Charlie. How do you think the new music, speaking of Sam Mendes, or of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, will do? Because hasn't had an out-of-town tryout like Matilda did. It hasn't got a reputation. It's very hard to find anything about it.
And I've heard nothing about it other than the fact that George and I were up for it. We were working out in Los Angeles, and we were asked if we would go for a meeting with Raymond Wu and Greg Madej, and they headed up Warner Brothers theatrical division, who had done Lestat. I think that was all they'd done at that point.
Wow.
I know, which wasn't a big hit for them. And they said, would you boys be interested? They knew about Mary Poppins, they knew about Honk, they thought, and they knew we were British, they thought they were the ideal people to do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And of course we were thrilled at the idea. And it was very complicated, I remember at the time, because when Lissy Dahl sold the rights to Danny DeVito, which was Warner Brothers, there was some sort of clause that said, in the event of somebody coming along and wanting the stage rights, Warner Brothers had the first option to match that offer. And Sam Mendes was interested in doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and Sam had this strong affiliation with DreamWorks, which is obviously a rival film company, and yet wanted to do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I can't remember when it happened, but because Disney theatrical became so successful, lots of the big film studios thought, hang on, we can have a bit of this too. We can turn a lot of our films into musicals. And DreamWorks was one of the first to form up,
Shrek.
Well, yeah, for Shrek and now for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Although Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is not one of their titles. So that was the complication. It was one film company.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is one of their titles, but is
it? Oh, I get mixed up with which. What's the book actually called?
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The Leslie Bricusse film Leslie discussed earlier is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but as Leslie said, the Roald Dahl estate washed their hands of that film and banned anything else, any stage productions of it happening. And it was only through your friend MacDonald that the junior version was able to be written by Leslie. So that's why it's not this version.
Right.
That's made its way to the stage.
Yeah. Well, at this point, when we met with Warner Brothers, we also met with Neil Street, and Cameron was kind of in the background, being interested, but not quite sure. He seems to be. And we had a meeting with Sam, and we wrote 2 songs on spec. One called The Smell of Melting Chocolate, which was sung by all the townspeople walking past the factory, which we're very pleased with. And a song which I wrote for all the grandparents, all 4 grandparents sleep in the same bed, and it was called Mr. Willy Wonka, and it was the little boy, Charlie, asking about Willy Wonka, and as the grandparents got more and more animated, so they became younger and younger and younger, and they ended up almost like kids jumping up and down on the bed, and at the end of the song they became old people back in the bed again, which we quite like the idea of, because it was the way that Willy Wonka was affecting the people of this town. And then we heard that Mark Shaman had got it, and what made us slightly, I think Mark's fantastic, but what made us slightly miffed was that at the time we were both represented by the same agent in Los Angeles, and he was obviously putting us up against Mark Shaman, which has happened to us quite a few times over the last 2 or 3 years. And yet I've no idea, because I haven't heard anything. So I don't know. It's him and Scott Whitman, isn't it, who are doing it? So I've no idea. All I know is that Sam is an amazing director.
You said George has seen some of the scenery.
Yeah, George is very friendly with Mark Thompson. Yeah, what George has seen, he said he's absolutely fantastic, which I don't know whether it's a model box or whether it's pictures and renderings or whatever, but he said it was amazing.
Works, it's probably 3D.
Oh, it might be.
I think there's still... I always think The Witches would be a really good musical.
Well, they're all really good stories, and what I like about them, to go back to your first question, why are they so popular? I think kids love villains, they love cruelty, and they love vengeance, and I think you get that in all of his stories. I didn't know The Witches at all until I went to see David's play version of it at the Duke of York's, I think it was, a few years ago. And brilliant puppet mice that went hand to hand along a piece of string, walking across on the front of the stage. I love the playing with scale.
And snakes.
But I remember being gobsmacked that within the first 2 minutes, this little boy's parents had been killed in a car crash, and he's being raised by a grandmother. What? And to have the audacity to do something as horrid as that in a children's story, I thought was amazing.
James and the Giant Peach as well.
Yeah.
Another musical, which is interesting because there's a production of it playing in Birmingham, and there's the film musical with a score by Randy Newman, of course, has a couple of songs in it. But I've also heard that there's a new musical of it being planned for Broadway.
Wow.
For next year, so it seems...
Well, after the success of Matilda, everyone's going to be jumping on that particular bandwagon, which is probably why it's not such a great idea to try and do the same. George and I are working on Wind in the Willows at the moment, and we're discussing not to open around the same time as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because if Charlie does what Matilda did, that's going to sew up that family market for that particular
or Wet Gosford Park, as I'm calling Wind in the Willows.
We're calling it Wind in the Fellows.
I think everyone else is as well. Anthony, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on Roald Dahl, and good luck with everything else.
Pleasure.
We'll look forward to speaking to you more in the future.
Thank you.
David Wood again. Are you familiar with the musicals of Revolting Rhymes and the the modern fairy tales that Roald Dahl did in verse?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen any, and I'm not quite sure what the rights situation is with those anymore. They tend to give the rights for a limited period of time, and I don't think any of them have been published. I may be totally wrong. But again, I have a feeling that the Dahl estate quite like the idea of there not being an authorised version of those, because I think they do like the idea of the freedom it gives to people.
Well, I wanted to ask you, do you think the Dahl estate have... because suddenly we're getting all these big Roald Dahl musicals. Do you think the Dahl estate are relaxing in a way?
No, they're the reverse. What has happened, for right or for wrong, they have succeeded in doing one musical on a largish scale, which has become all-conquering and has become an award-winning musical, and that, I think, was the aim. One of the things that I was told years ago was that Dahl, surprisingly in a way...
did he like musicals?
Well, this is the extraordinary thing. I was told that he always said that he would love one of his books to become a very successful musical. The story goes that his favourite film was Mary Poppins. Now, this is extraordinary when you think about it.
More than P.R. Travers thought of it.
Well, this is the point. This is what is so extraordinary. When you consider that the writer of the book hated the film, and that Cameron had a huge problem in trying to get the rights to do... I mean, what he recognised was that if you were going to do a film of Mary Poppins, you had to use the songs. people wouldn't accept it without, and therefore he had to get not only her blessing, but he had to get the blessing of the use of those songs. And it took him however many years, 20 years. And,
400 years.
And I think he had to wait till she died. It was a bit sad. No, I think he finally did...
now he's dancing on her grave.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I think she was a wonderful woman. But Dahl loved, apparently, that film and always felt that... And I think he was thinking more of film than stage, to be honest. I think he was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a film musical version of one of the books?
Well, interestingly, he did do the book for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, didn't he? And he created the child catcher and things like that.
Well, exactly. And although there's a lot of debate as to how much of his screenplay was actually used, and there were huge rows between him and, was it Ken Taylor, the director? I can't remember. But you hear all sorts of rumours. But what is undeniable is that the child catcher was his creation.
Yeah, of course.
And that is the thing, in many ways, that made it. I mean, Dahl...
It's the Grand High Witch, in a way, isn't it?
That's right.
Male form.
Well, Dahl writes the best baddies of anybody. I mean, he is brilliant at baddies, whether it be Aunt Spiker and Sponge, or whether it be, as you say, the Grand High Witch, or even the giants in the BFG, or Victor Hazel in Danny Champion of the World.
But with Charlie, who's the baddie in Charlie?
Well, Charlie is a very strange concoction. I've always found it a very odd book, because what he's really saying...
There's no story, is there?
Well,
I mean, it's just...
Well, he's sort of criticising children. He's saying that
parents.
there are children who behave in intolerable ways and that they should be punished, really, and that the parents who bring up their children in such a way are equally guilty. It's a very peculiar story, and I remember reading it and thinking, well, Charlie, yes, is our hero, and he is just like a lot of the other Dahl titles. He is slightly, underprivileged, and there is a sense of justice in the fact that he is given this prize. But of course, the other children who are given the prize, they get it as well. And it's a strange structure. It's a very strange structure. And I'll be very interested to see how they've done the musical version, because you've got to find a way of your audience, and I'm not just talking about children here, because Dahl is sort of broader than that, but you've got to find a way of getting your audience to really root for that main character, to feel sorry for that main character, to want that main character to succeed. That, I think, must take precedence over some of the other things. But at the same time, you've got these awful children who are, in many ways, the main part of the book,
baddies, aren't
and
they,
their
as
demise. Well. That's right. And Willy Wonka is a very strange character, of course. I mean, do we love him? Do we find him a bit spooky, a bit strange? I don't know.
Especially nowadays with all the...
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's quite a tall order. So it'll be very interesting to see what they've done. And it's taken them quite a long time to get to the situation they're in now with it. They've been working on it for years. But I think that it may well be that this is not just the second of several. I think it may be the second of lots.
I mean, that's what's so interesting. So back to my original question, you think the Dahl estate have tightened the purse strings in a way more than loosened them?
What they're doing is being very controlling, and they're being very selective. See, when Anthony and George and I worked on Matilda, which must be nearly 20 years ago, we were not given the rights. We were told that, we could do some work on it and present it to them. And we did, and they said no. Now, whether or not they were thinking at that point, and this never struck us, that Matilda was the biggie, and this was the one that was going to really take off, but they didn't hear in the songs, or they didn't find in my the scenes that I'd written in the book, they didn't find a certain magic or whatever. Well, and you could say, well, they've been proved to be absolutely right, and they by waiting, they've found the magic formula. and good luck to them. I think that it will affect things, and what worries me a little bit is that to only have those would seem to me to be somewhat elitist. In other words, if the only way in which you can see a professional Dahl is to pay 90 quid or whatever it be to go to Drury Lane, then I would feel that was a bit of a shame. Whether or not it will mean that my adaptations will still be allowed to be done on tour professionally and by amateur companies, I mean, I hope so. I don't know. I don't have any magic formula.
You have a mortgage and things.
Well, what I don't know is how they will be thinking in the future. In other words, if they turn around and say, take James the Giant Peach, that they want this new musical version, if and when it happens, to become the authorised version of James the Giant Peach. Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? I would think that would be a shame, because I don't think it would be possible to do an enormous Broadway West End in a school. It would be tricky. So we'll just have to see. But I think what has happened in the past 10 years, 15 years, is there is a realisation that these stage adaptations can be commercially very, very lucrative. And the big Broadway ones, I mean, mine do quite well, but I mean, it's nothing compared with the success of a big West End musical or a Broadway musical. And I think the estate realises that. One just hopes that they won't solely be going, even with the foundation, because a lot of money that goes into the foundation, which does wonderful charitable work. But I would hope that they didn't solely go for the dollars and pounds.
Charles Brunton. So I'm at the National Theatre with my friend Charlie Brunton. Hello, Charlie.
Hello, you right?
I'm fine, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, good.
Charlie, you are in the ensemble for Matilda, and you are playing Sergei, the Russian person who appears sometime during the show, and you are also playing a clown or an party entertainer. But who else are you also playing that you have been doing recently?
Oh yes, I cover Miss Trunchbull in the show as well, which is
doesn't mean
fun.
You sit on her, you actually
play the role. Yeah, I don't put a sheet over her. I was on yesterday for the Sunday matinee. Really good fun. Yes, really enjoy it, really.
Physically, incredibly demanding role, isn't it?
Yeah, it's physically a very demanding role, but it gets more manic the further you get through the show as well. Particularly with the weight of the bodysuits and the costume on top of you, you often get quite bad cramps in your legs. In fact, yesterday, the hardest part is actually writing on the chalkboard. Seriously, you get such bad pain in your right arm, and you think, oh great, and I've got to flip over a vault. Well, I've got cramp in my left leg and my right arm.
But I've just picked a child up. So.
Yeah, I just picked a child. Actually, that bit's quite fun. I like that bit. It's very stress relieving. You pick up the kid by the pigtails and you throw her around in a circle.
And let go and see what
happens. And she flies around the auditorium
and
drops into the auditorium. Yes, that's how that happens.
Wonderful. And the chalk does fly by itself.
Yeah, the chalk, that's magic. It's Matilda, she moves it with her eyes. That's how it happens. It's very clever. It's part of the audition process.
So you're part of the second cast, and how does it feel to be in this in a new version of this show? Because there were some slight changes. We talked about them on the show before. Did it feel like you were entering history in a way? Oh,
it did actually, because obviously before I started the show, it had such a good reputation. And in fact, before I was auditioning, I went to see it, and it's just literally, it's just one of the best things I've ever seen. So I was just so thrilled to actually be in the job. I couldn't believe it when I got it.
Were you aware of the fact you were going to be in it when you saw it, or did you just see it?
Funny story. My friend Matt Clark, who's in the last cast, he was on as the Doctor that day, and I was just walking past the theatre, saw the poster saying that he's on, and went to the box office, and I said,
able to get a ticket?
No, it was completely sold out. And I said to the woman at the box office, is there any way you could get me and my friend Matt's on? And she went, right, don't tell anyone, but I'll give you one of the company seats at full price. So anyway, I bought the ticket. She managed to get me in one of the company seats last minute. Just as I left the box office, I got a phone call from my agent saying, oh yeah, you've got a casting next week on Monday for Matilda. And I thought, oh my God, I've just got a ticket for that. How weird.
And who helped you with the songs?
Oh, Rosie Ash, the wonderful Rosie Ash. And Susan as well. Susan Humphrey, she did this bit
and Jonathan Cohen.
And Jonathan Cohen as well, of course. Jonathan Cohen, the whole team of people. Yeah, I've got a whole
entourage. entourage.
My whole entourage of audition assistants helping me get the job.
But it worked, and now
Yes.
you're in Matilda playing a various amount of characters. You had to learn Russian.
Oh yes, yeah, really good fun. Obviously, it was written in direct Russian in the script, and I had a phonetics teacher came in.
Do you know how that came about, by any chance?
I would like to say yes, because that would make me sound intelligent, but no.
Okay. Well, it's very simple. Michael Boyd, who is the artistic head person at the Royal Shakespeare Company, speaks fluent Russian.
Matthew does as well, apparently.
There you go.
I always thought that was the link, but oh well. I forgot the first question. Yeah, the first question about.
Charlie's very excitable.
I'm very excited. I just had a coffee as well. It was really good entering the show, particularly when they were reworking the opening number as well. It's like they reworked it for us in a way. All those particular partner work, the parents in the background, they've all got sort of different backstories, and the way it was all choreographed with Peter Darling stuff and Ellen, his assistant, who's wonderful. It was all specific to the people that they put into the show, so you felt really, really involved with it. It was really nice. Really, really nice.
I like the fact there are chavs in all in their shell suits and things.
Yes. I love it when Leanne, she's like the resident kind of assistant-y dance captain-y choreography type person.
For the technical terms in this week.
She looks like Mel C. It's like Sporty Spice.
I've noticed it's been on telly a lot. It was on what was it? Junior Master Chef and things.
They're hilarious. Those girls, the Matildas, they're genius. Seriously, they're on a league of their own.
Speaking of television and stuff, they've been filming new TV spots for Broadway, haven't they? And presumably England as well, perhaps.
Oh yes, well a few weeks ago we were doing a bit of filming in the theatre. They set up a whole camera crew in the auditorium. We did like a whole week of filming, not the full show. It was certain specific sections that Matthew wanted to put into sort of effectively a trailer for to publicise the show out there. New trailer, and also for one over here. They're using most of the footage with us here. And then for Broadway, they're going to edit bits in, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think they're editing bits in. And also they had Bertie in last week filming.
He's off to Broadway to do
the role, exactly. Some little scenes, I think, some bits from the classroom. I think they had a playground in there, I'm not sure. But yeah, they're very specific with which sections they were doing.
No big laser moments or magic tricks revealed during the trailers, or have they gone for any of those scenes?
No, I wasn't involved. If they did, I wasn't involved with those scenes, so I'm not sure.
And also, it was, by the time this episode goes out, this would have aired already, but the Royal Variety performance, they went over to do that.
They did a bit of When I Grow Up, the bit on the swings, and then they went into the song Naughty, and I think it's Chloe was the girl, Matilda, who did that one, who's hysterical. She's a lovely little girl. She's the one who didn't like the jelly on the Junior MasterChef programme. She didn't like the jelly, but she liked the meat platter thing. They're all lovely, those girls. Seriously, they're so funny. So some of the things they say in the wings are absolutely hysterical. I can't say them now, but...
bloody show, I'm sick of it already.
No. Some of the things they come up with are absolutely hysterical. Like, they're just like adults. They look like little adults, if that makes sense. It's like one day, there was quite a few people off ill on the show, like a bug had gone round. She came up to me, one of the girls, I think it was it Lara, and she was like, oh, it's so hard work in this industry, isn't it? I mean, because everyone works so hard in this business. I mean, as soon as someone gets something, it just goes around, doesn't it, and just knocks you out. I mean, it's awful, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, actually, I've got a funny story about Lara, because obviously I did Oliver when I was a kid, and Lara, she was hysterical in the wings. She said to me a few weeks ago, I'm famous, they've mentioned my name on the radio. I went, well, when I was Oliver, I turned on the Christmas lights on Oxford Street, beat that. And then she did. She turned on the lights on Oxford Street.
Oh, yes, that was another thing that the show's done, hasn't it?
Yeah, she did. So, she did that recently, and I think she did a number from the show as well. Probably Naughty, I'm guessing, or Quiet.
I think that Naughty and Quiet will become sort of every...
Oh, but they are those songs are so wonderful. His writing's genius. To mention what he's done with the songs, absolutely brilliant. And I heard... when I was doing Trunchbull stuff the other day, just rehearsing it, someone said to me that he actually created the Hammer song one morning in the theatre. He just sat down and during and wrote that Hammer song.
I know the story. It was an afternoon and they needed a song for that scene, so Tim Rich said, all right, I'll go and do something, and then he came up with this 5/4 monstrosity, and You know, it's wonderful. And how's it going with your ribbon twirling? And
Oh, it's hilarious, that bit. I've been practicing loads in the Stalls bar and the Circle bar. I took out a chandelier in the Stalls bar with the ribbon. I've got my own practice ribbon at home to go through it all, which is...
Your flat in Soho, I'm sure it looks fabulous.
Oh, no. I live in Soho, and I've got like a flat rooftop up there. And so I've done the whole show, that whole Trunchbull show, on the rooftop. All the neighbours are looking at me going, what on earth?
Don't do it in the rain.
Well, I nearly threw off the roof once, actually. It was during the ribbon knots, when you throw it and you catch it at the end. I was doing that bit and nearly dived onto Dean Street. That would have been a shock for the local resident.
Yes. Dead body found outside Soho.
Yeah, with ribbon. With bright, luminous yellow ribbon.
That's all, really. So, Matilda still playing at the Cambridge Theatre and off to the Schubert Theatre in New York.
Yes.
Charlie Brunton, thank you very much for chatting to us.
That's a pleasure.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
Surprise me. Think of something.
We'll put on Twitter when you're appearing as Miss Trunchbull.
Oh, yes, I will do. So do pop down if you can. It sells out really quickly, though, doesn't it?
You can get tickets for sort of December next year.
December next year. See, if people don't know this, I've got lots of people, my friends that come up, they think you can get tickets on the day. You can't. You have to book in advance. Please do book in advance. Please.
SeeTickets.com.
Yeah. SeeTickets.com.
And to close the episode, here is the final part of the discussion I had with David Wood. Your play of George's Marvellous Medicine with incidental music is, you tell us.
Well, it's doing a season at the Corn Exchange, Cambridge for Christmas. It toured about a year ago. It toured for 2 years. It's an amazingly popular book. I mean, to be honest, when I was asked to adapt it...
and there's no film, which is interesting.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, it was the 7th one I did, and... I'm not saying that one only goes for the successful ones, the most popular ones, but when I was told that this was one of the most popular, I was surprised. But it is incredibly popular, and the book sales show this. And it did amazing business when it toured last time. So anyway, it's doing this Christmas season, then it's going off to Dubai and places like that for a while. After that, I don't know. I don't know whether it will tour again. From the theatre point of view, from the theatre management point of view, it's a very nice one because it's relatively small. I mean, you have a cast of 4 plus somebody who plays a giant chicken who can be an assistant stage manager understudy. So it's relatively small in scale, and that's quite useful when you're playing in some of the theatres like Corn Exchange, Cambridge, like the Oxford Playhouse, theatres like that. We need shows for those theatres, and there's no way that you could do, say, Matilda in those theatres. So I'm hoping that I might still be in there with with my adaptations for a few years yet. We will see.
You're an extension of Roald Dahl, I think.
Well, I would like to think that I am faithful to him in my adaptations, but I do have immense respect for him.
Well, the fact that his stuff can play in Dubai,
yes,
and England,
yes, oh yes. But as the years have gone by, when I first did the BFG, which was my first one, I think it was 22 years ago, and I respected him hugely as a result of doing that. And as I've done more and more, it's been fascinating delving into his mind in the way he structures things, and it's a very strange mind, it's a very anarchic mind, it's a very pro-child mind, and there are lots of ingredients in his stories which are both classic ingredients of all stories for children and so on, but there are a lot of new thoughts and contemporary thoughts as well. It's an extraordinary mixture, and I think that the way he's suddenly got even more popular in America than he was, much more popular than he was in America 10, 20 years ago, when a lot of schools didn't, they banned him. But now he's on reading lists. So I think this is only the beginning. And I think when you consider that there are about, 14, 15 titles there, all of which are popular in book form, I'd be very lucky because I've done 8 of them. I haven't done Charlie and I haven't done Matilda. Well, that's 10. but there are a few more, and I think they'll just go on and on. They won't date either. That's the other remarkable thing about his writing, that they feel quite contemporary. Even one that was written 30, 35 years ago, like the BFG, the fact that you've got the Queen of England in it, the fact that you've got the head of the army in the Air Force, there are these contemporary references. Very, very clever, and yet with a traditional subject like giants, from fairy tales,
Witches,
which have been there, witches as well. Yeah. That's right. And if you look at James and the Giant Peach, I mean, really, Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge are the ugly sisters from Cinderella, if we're honest. I mean, there's no harm in that, but there are all these references. When the peach grows and expands, it's very Jack and the Beanstalk. There are these certain ingredients that he must have latched onto from classic fairy tale, and brilliantly, it's like old wine in new bottles, transformed and reformed and in a masterly way, found a way of empowering the child, because the child protagonist is always the most important character who children readers identify with, and providing a huge variety of stories. I mean, I think that's what children love about Dahl. I was in a school the other day in Bolton, and it was a very, very sort of multicultural school.
You say Baltimore for a second.
No, not Bolton. No, Bolton near Lancashire, and they were all loving Dahl, and he was almost the equivalent. I mean, when I was a child, it was Enid Blyton who taught us to read, really, but I believe it's now Dahl, and you get a book like The Magic Finger, which is my latest adaptation, which opens in America next year. It's not opening here yet, but that was actually written for children with a low reading ability. It's written with a small vocabulary, and it's very, very clever, and it's a very good story. And there are all sorts of echoes in it later on in Danny Champion of the World and in Matilda. But very, very clever at getting into the mind of a child, and well, it's very anti-adults, really, and it is anarchic, and it is all the things which people who do complain about Dahl is, but I mean, that's why it's so delightful and why he's so loved, I think.
So, there you have it. I hope you've learned a bit more about the past, present and future of Roald Dahl musicals. A bit of a Christmas carol thing going on here. A very Merry Christmas from all of us at Musical Talk, from Thos, myself, Andrew, the various Andrews, and everyone else. We hope you have a lovely time, and we'll speak to you in the new year in 2013. My name's Nick Hutson. This episode has been Copyright Musical Talk 2012, except with the songs where the copyright persists with the original creators. Bye-bye.